The UK government has recently secretly supplied Ukraine with an additional batch of Storm Shadow cruise missiles. This was reported by Bloomberg, citing its own sources. The exact number of missiles delivered has not been disclosed. The article states that the missile delivery was carried out to ensure Ukraine has sufficient stockpiles ahead of the winter months, during which, according to the UK, the Kremlin may intensify attacks on Ukrainian civilians. Bloomberg emphasizes that the UK and its allies are trying to show Vladimir Putin that Western support for Ukraine will surpass the Russian economy's ability to sustain its military efforts. Storm Shadows are high-precision, air-launched guided missiles with a range of over 250 kilometers. Ukrainian forces first used British long-range weapons against military targets on Russian territory in November of last year. In October of this year, the General Staff of Ukraine announced that a strike had been carried out. The Bryansk chemical plant was hit using long-range Storm Shadow missiles, which managed to penetrate the Russian air defense system.
On October 21st, 2025, the air forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in coordination with the ground forces, naval forces, and other components of Ukraine's defense forces, struck the Bryansk chemical plant.
The agency also shared that the Bryansk chemical plant is an important part of the military-industrial complex of the aggressor country. Recently, the Wall Street Journal reported that the US administration has lifted a key restriction on Ukraine's use of certain missiles. These are long-range missiles provided by Western allies, which has allowed Kyiv to expand attacks on targets inside Russia. They were also awaiting approval from President Donald Trump to provide Ukraine with long-range AGAVK missiles. But he himself said that he is not considering this possibility for now. Political scientist and military expert from the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Kirilo Sazonov, gave his assessment of the Storm Shadow.
These are really awesome missiles, really great. And honestly, when we talk about Tomahawks, it's nothing, guys. Believe me, the British Storm missiles are fantastic. Especially now when there are no problems with the guidance system that we are receiving, the coordinates for strikes are provided by the United States of America. And this will continue because Russia's attempt playing games with Trump ended very badly.
Earlier, Anatoly Krapchinsky, Deputy General Director of a company producing electronic warfare equipment and an aviation expert, stated to the Ukrainian Defense Forces, ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles are needed more than the American Tomahawks. According to military observer Denis Popovich, with the help of Storm Shadow missiles, the Ukrainian armed forces will be able to keep Crimea and the Kerch Bridge under full fire control. Defense Express military expert Valery Ryabik reported that, according to preliminary calculations, about 10 such missiles could disrupt Russian communications across the bridge over the Kerch Strait. He noted that this is a very precise missile which uses a terrain contour matching system for navigation. And in the final stage, the Storm Shadow jettisons the nose cone from its warhead and homes in on the target using an electro-optical guidance system.
Despite this, the defense forces are systematically managing to strike the enemy fleet, primarily thanks to maritime drones. To learn more about security and the situation in the Black Sea, I will speak with Pavlo Lakichuk, Head of Security Programs at the Center for Global Studies Strategy 21. Welcome, Mr. Pavlo. Glory to Ukraine.
Likewise, good afternoon. Glory to the heroes.
Mr. Pavlo, would you say that at this point Ukraine truly dominates the Black Sea region?
Unfortunately, no. But we need to understand there is such a thing as domination, and the military has a specific term for it. There is the term domination, and there is the term superiority. The first thing is to gain superiority. In battle, on the battlefield for us, in the theater, in the maritime theater. So, in the first year of resistance, Ukraine deprived them of their superiority altogether. The Russians actually dominated when our coastline was blockaded. They dominated the Black Sea. In the first year, we took that away from them. Such a function at all. And then the struggle for superiority began. And now it can clearly be said that the Ukrainian Navy, even the tiny ones on combat boats, they are dominating. No, they still have the advantage. To truly dominate, we need to drive the enemy out of Novorossiysk and block them there. Of the 4 tasks that the Black Sea Fleet used to be able to and was supposed to perform, blockading the Ukrainian Sea, supporting ground forces on the coastal front, maritime logistics, and participating in missile strikes on Ukrainian territory, they are now only capable of performing 1. In fact, only the last task. That's regarding the naval component. There's also naval aviation, which is actively involved in the actions of the Russian Federation's air forces in the south, and which we are also harassing quite effectively. Strikes on Fardiska, today and yesterday, those were evidence of that.
If we assess the composition of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, how would you evaluate its combat capability?
Just recently there was an event that seemed rather insignificant at first glance. One of the small missile ships of the Russian fleet from the Caspian went to the Baltic. And among the experts the question arose, is it fleeing or what? We looked and said, watch closely. The Amur, together with its sister ships, was declared to be ships for the Black Sea Fleet. Small missile ships for the Black Sea Fleet. We sank one in Kerch, and the second was hit so badly that it's still under repair. Whether it will be commissioned into the fleet or not is unknown, and this one was moved to the Caspian Sea. Quickly, as far away from the Black Sea theater as possible. Now it's actually being moved to the Baltic theater, closer to the manufacturer. Well, here is one of the pieces of evidence of what's happening in the Black Sea theater. The Russians don't know how to properly use their Black Sea fleet to get the most out of it. Its combat capabilities, well, basically that's it. Are they trying to copy our actions? And this is exactly where the danger lies. Because we've gotten used to their structure, but now they're trying to copy the tactics we've used against them. For us, this is a new threat. It's a serious
threat. Pavlo, I wanted to ask you more. You mentioned the Caspian Sea. What about the missile strikes they launch from the Caspian? Do they comply with international maritime agreements?
What maritime agreements? They're firing from the Caspian across their own territory. By the way, the Tu-95s, they're based in Engels, right? They fly to the Caspian and launch from there, or over the reservoir area on the Volga. Because the missiles they have aren't entirely reliable like coastal ones, they could fall on populated areas. So they move out over the water in order to carry out the launches. If it falls, it will fall into the water. It'll just hit some sturgeons. That's about the quality of the Russian fleet. And as for international law, remember how they started striking Syrian cities? In fact, the first demonstration of Kaliber missiles to the world those were launches from the Caspian Sea, over Iran, Iraq, all the way to Syria. Back then, as far as I remember, 4 missiles didn't make it. They fell on Iran. The Iranians kept quiet about it in a friendly way.
What capabilities do the Russians have when it comes to building new ships? You've already mentioned their repair capabilities.
You shouldn't look at the Black Sea Fleet in isolation. It's just one fleet on its own. Russia also has the Northern Fleet, the Pacific Fleet, the Baltic Fleet, and the Caspian Flotilla. And that's not all. So they have a lot of work to do. Frankly, what doesn't really truly concern us is how they allocate and spend billions on restoring ancient structures. The Soviet-built nuclear missile cruisers like the Pyotr Veliki will obviously be decommissioned. They want to launch the Nakhimov instead, which has been under repair and in storage, if I'm not mistaken, since 1993, or maybe even earlier. So it's basically a piece of metal that's no longer physically capable. All the more so, they're pouring billions of rubles and dollars into it, and let them pour in less because they're needed for tanks. As for our theater, they're shifting to medium universal ships and small vessels. Specifically, these are small missile ships, missile boats, and patrol ships. This is due, among other things, to the lack of capability to build medium-sized ships, including the fact that our Mykolaiv no longer sells them. They don't sell anymore. This should have been stopped a long time ago, but they can't produce gas turbine units themselves. They manufacture lower tonnage ships with diesel engines. At first, they bought power units from the Germans, all man top-notch. Now the Germans as well. Sanctions have been imposed on them. That's why they're trying to produce something with their own power units. It's a kind of ersatz, and the quality isn't very good. Nevertheless, they still retain capabilities in the coastal zone. This shouldn't be dismissed or ignored. And, by the way, coming back to this, they're copying our experience with naval drones. And now they're trying not only to set up production for the authorities, but also to attempt combat use. This is probably the greatest danger, apart from the mine threat.
Mr. Pavlo, I have one more question. The Kerch Bridge, illegally constructed by the Russians in the Black Sea waters. What condition is it in? How many more strikes are needed for it to collapse? And in general, what is its current function for the Russian army?
Its function, by the way, has diminished. It was built as the main logistical artery, serving as a crucial and essential route for transportation. However, after the first strikes by the SBU on the Kerch Bridge, the Russians concluded that it was simply too dangerous to transport all military cargo and supplies across the Kerch Bridge. That's why we're now talking about a whole range of different methods that will, over time, eventually render the Crimean Bridge completely unusable. This includes the Kerch Bridge, the Kerch ferry crossing Port Kavkaz and Port Krim. It also involves transporting equipment using large landing ships from ports on the Caucasus coast, from Novorossiysk to Feodosia, particularly to Kerch, but mainly to Feodosia. They are trying to use all these options. We are trying to counter all these options. These are not just strikes on the Crimean Bridge. Remember last year's strikes, very precise, which lasted for a long time, disabled the Kerch ferry crossing, as well as hits on Temryuk and the port of Crimea. And the destruction, as well as the sinking that occurred during the dangerous and challenging sea crossing, and already in the port city of Feodosia, of Russian landing ships that were loaded with ammunition and military equipment. This requires ongoing work, in parallel on all tracks. Because if we squeeze them here somewhere, stop movement on the Kerch Bridge, they will use the ferry crossing. That's why we need to strike everywhere. Well, as for the Kerch Bridge, I'd leave them a little bit of it so they have nowhere to run.
Mr. Pavlo, thank you for taking the time to talk with us. That was Pavlo Lakichuk, Head of Security Programs at the Center for Global Studies, Strategy 21.